Are you a first responder, a veteran, a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, or a Let's Go Blues radio listener? Of course you are. If you're in the market to buy or sell a home, call real estate superstar Mike Burgoyne today at 314-753-4060 or email him at mike@strikewithmike.com to earn special rates today.
60 Pickleball is an industry leader in high-end pickleball paddles. Use discount code CPRICE10 to get 10% off at 60pickleball.com. Don't get stuck on the court with an inferior paddle. Go next level with 60.
This is Carl Lindbom of Carl Lindbom's Carly Bon, and thanks for tuning in to Let's Go Blues Radio over the summer. You'll hear some of Jeff Ponder, a little of Bill Day, and unfortunately some of that nasty American Curt Price. Enjoy the show.
From St. Louis, I'm Jeff Ponder, and this is Let's Go Blues Radio, the original and longest-running blues hockey podcast. This is episode number 42 of season 14 and the 523rd episode of all time. Support for Let's Go Blues Radio is brought to you in part by Mike Burgoyne of Rio Brokerage Realty. Check out strikewithmike.com today and get started selling your current home or buying your dream home today. On today's show, filmmaker, producer, guitarist, and author Dave Bidini joins me to discuss his various hockey-related projects, but most importantly, his role in creating the Summit 72 series located on Amazon Prime in the U.S. The Summit series was a major cultural proxy battle of the Cold War, showcasing the supremacy of two different socio-political systems through the lens of hockey. 16 million Canadians watched the final game, demonstrating the event's profound impact on the country's population. I feel like if you are a hockey historian at all, if you have researched the past of the game, if you've lived through it, obviously, but if you're even newer to the game, you know what the Summit Series is. It's a very, very big event in the world of hockey, one of the biggest to ever take place, to be quite honest. And you know, it's funny when we kind of talk about this when Dave comes on. I did not realize the cultural impact of this series for Canada and honestly for Russia. This was something that the Canadians went in thinking it was an 8-game series. They played 4 in Canada, 4 in Russia. The Canadians went in thinking this is going to be a cakewalk. We're going to watch our NHL All-Stars just dominate Russia in 8 games. They're going to blow them out. That's not what happened. We'll talk about it. But and then Russia, it was kind of their way to prove that their elite squad could battle anyone in the world in hockey supremacy. So it was just such a crazy event because back in the day, they didn't have NHL superstars playing against anyone else. So, and you can think back in the day, it was mostly Canadians. There was Americans, obviously, floating around in the U.S., playing for the I guess, let's see, 72. I think there was, 9, 10 teams. I can't remember exactly how many there were, but there were, it was not how it is today, how we have the best of the best facing each other all the time, especially in the Olympics. Back then, the Russians were basically considered amateur beaters. They beat all the best amateur teams, but never had a chance to face off with the best that Canada or the U.S. could provide. And so this kind of provided that. And this was, again, 8 years before the 1980 Olympics. We all know about Team USA defeating USSR. This was kind of, it's funny to think about the difference between the two because the U.S., it was like, we're going to get destroyed. But this was Canada saying, USSR, they play amateurs. We're going to destroy them. So just a lot of fun stuff that we'll talk about here with Dave. But yes, I know Canada, this is a St. Louis podcast, but I just thought, again, anyone who's interested in hockey and watches the sport, learns about anything that's happened in the past with the sport, this was just a good opportunity for us to talk with someone who's a real kind of hockey historian with the Summit Series. So Dave Bidini will be on in just a couple minutes. Only news coming out so far for the Blues this week. They did sign on Tuesday Milan Lucic to a professional tryout contract. Lucic is 37. He last appeared with the Boston Bruins in 2023-24 when he posted 2 assists in 4 regular season games. In November of that season, he took an indefinite leave of absence from the team and later entered the NHL and NHLPA Player Assistance Program. Lucic has since completed the program and been reinstated by the NHL. Lucic has played in 17 NHL seasons, including Boston, Calgary, Edmonton, the Kings, and he's played in about 1,100 games, a little over that. But yeah, and obviously was a very impactful player for the Bruins back in the day, and had some nice stints here and there for other teams. But I will say there's people that are divided on this, obviously. I mean, that's everything on the internet, right? But I do feel like this is something that's just pushing the younger kids to play their game in training camp. I do think this is we just want to get a veteran in here to push them to be better, provide any insight he can. I don't think this is a situation Doug Armstrong's really thinking there's a chance he's going to sign Lucic. I mean, maybe there's a chance he steps in on the fourth line and can provide you some solid minutes. But for me, I think this is all a matter of saying, okay, kids, we've got this veteran that we're happy to sign and put out there if we need to for a bottom 6 role. Show us what you got. So, and then it might even be a kind of a olive branch to Lucic too. I don't know if he's got any. You got to think he's probably got a little bit of clout with Jim Montgomery. But you got to wonder too if maybe this is hey, we're gonna help you out here, Lucic, after you completed the program, and we will hopefully get some other team that'll be interested in you. And again, maybe he shows up and blows the Blues away, and they give him a 1-year contract. I don't know, but I will say I think the thought process right now is not let's get Lucic in here and see if he's a fit. I think it's a more let's get him in here to push everybody else to play better and give the Blues a reason to tell Lucic his services are not needed in St. Louis. Well, let's go ahead and get into our commercial break. When we come back, you will hear from Dave Bidini, the great hockey mind behind the Summit 72 series, as well as other hockey media. You are listening to Let's Go Blues Radio.
We'll return after these messages.
As a hockey player, Mike Burgoyne knows a thing or two about making the perfect play. And when it comes to real estate, he's always ready to score the winning goal for his clients. If you're a first responder, a veteran, a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, or a Let's Go Blues Radio listener looking to score the home of your dreams, you'll receive special rates with Mike. Go ahead, shoot some questions his way, and he'll have the answer quicker than Curtis Joseph on a breakaway.
Curtis Joseph got the pedal down!
Any barriers? Mike will mow them down like Chris Pronger in front of the net. He'll score you your dream home or sell your existing home faster than a Brett Hall one-timer.
Flip past the Hall, he shoots, he scores!
See Burgoyne's real estate prowess in action today by emailing him at mike@strikewithmike.com or by calling 314-753-4060. That email again is mike@strikewithmike.com, and that phone number is 314-753-4060. Getting Mike Burgoyne on your team will be the boost your power play needs.
The battle for the top spot in the league is on the line. Many warriors have entered the concrete jungle, but when the smoke clears, only one will remain. They all want it, but only one shall have it. Hide your children, lock your doors. Those with weak stomachs should almost certainly look away. This is Big Boy Pickleball. You have been warned.
Let's Go Blues Radio, the longest running St. Louis Blues podcast with Price, Ponder, and Day.
And we are back from break, and I am joined now by Dave Bidini. He is the publisher of West End Phoenix. He's a guitarist for is it Rio Statics?
Right.
And an author of 13 books and a filmmaker. I guess my first question for you, Dave, is there anything you don't do?
I'm a terrible actor. A few people have asked me to be in short films. I'm very wooden. But a lot of it stems from just sort of, I got my first publishing contract to write my first book, I think largely because of the popularity of the band here in Canada. And then, when we go calling with shows like the one that we're going to talk about today, it helps to kind of, have a bit of a following and a fan base, and people know that the work is generally pretty good and stuff too. So, yeah, it's great. Listen, it's never a dull day when you're doing all those different things, and they're all kind of cousins, I think, all of those things you mentioned as well. So it's all kind of in the same quote unquote arena.
Right. Yep. And it's, it's creativity, it lets your mind continue to develop and think about new things. And I'm sure for you, it's just like, there's just always a million things going on up here. And it's just like, how do I get it out for the rest of the world to see?
Well, and when you're younger too, like you kind of, dream of sort of having these opportunities, and you have as many good ideas when you're young as when you're on the other side of 60. But the difference now is, having worked at it for a long time, you can actually kind of make those calls, and people, know who the call's coming from and stuff. If you have an idea to execute it and put it in play, it's a lot easier now. So,
right.
So it's great to have those ideas go from the imagination to the screen, which is in the case of 72.
Yeah. So again, we're going to talk about Summit of 72, but I wanted to ask you, you are currently, for those of us watching on the YouTube and Facebook channels, you are currently in your newspaper office. You are the publisher for West End Phoenix. You are in the Toronto area. We do have some listeners up in Canada, Toronto side. So what can people expect if they wanted to check out West End Phoenix?
We're a print newspaper. We started 9 years ago because all of the community newspapers in our city had disappeared, basically. A lot of them had been bought by one company that immediately fired everybody, and they became these glorified flyers. And we just sort of thought, well, what if we could bring back a newspaper that, covered local news, right? And sort of reinvented the idea of a community newspaper. And really nobody knew how it was going to go. And if we got through a year of publishing, we would have been happy. But here we are 9 years later. We have 100 delivery volunteers who come and pick up the paper every time it's published and go out into their communities, and they deliver it to their neighbors and stuff. It's really a great, world of people that were completely, strangers to me before we started it. And, tying it back to sports a little bit as well. We do like a sports and music issue every cycle as well. So it's always great to think of new things in that sort of realm to write about. And because Toronto, it's a great sports city, as I'm sure St. Louis is. There are so many great local stories, right? Stories that wouldn't normally be covered by kind of the larger press here. So we get to go really sort of granular. We get to talk about new boxing gyms that have opened, that are giving opportunity to marginalized kids who want to learn. We talk about the history of some of the hockey rinks here. In fact, the New York Rangers, like back in the 1910s, used to have training camp on one of the local parks here outdoors back in that day. And then listen, a lot of the streets here in the West End of Toronto, a lot of the players from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s for the Leafs just lived in our neighborhoods. Sean Burke used to get his hair cut at the barbershop just up the street from where I'm talking to you. So there's a lot of great kind of granular local sports stories that we cover as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, obviously Toronto's a huge hockey city. I know that they love their Raptors and Blue Jays as well. So, but yeah, I mean, that sounds like some excellent opportunity for anybody in the Ontario area. It is West End Phoenix if they want to check it out online, correct? westendphoenix.com, correct?
That's right. Yep.
All right. Great. Well, again, we were going to talk about Summit 72, but I have one more question for you, and I need to read this because I just learned this within the past week. You are the author of Tropic of Hockey, My Search for the Game in Unlikely Places. And you apparently traveled the world basically looking for, quote unquote, the true spirit of hockey. This is incredible. You made multiple stops, Hong Kong, Transylvania, among them. What gave you the inspiration for this book, and what was it like traveling the world looking for the spirit of hockey?
Yeah, like I felt very kind of disenchanted by, with hockey in the late 1990s. We were losing a lot of old rinks. The game was, dominated by the neutral zone trap. It became a very kind of stultifying, really hockey culture with its, pedal down on the corporate side largely. And I found it was tough to kind of relate to players and teams in that era. And yeah, I wanted to go. And we're such a kind of a worn-in hockey culture here, right? It's stretches back hundreds of years. I wanted to go to places where the game was kind of new, right? So there were people experiencing it and playing it kind of for the first time. Now, that's not entirely true of the town in Transylvania where I visited. They've been playing the game for a long time after they saw like a newsreel footage of Canadian infantrymen playing hockey. And it's cold in this town in Transylvania. And so they were like, we can play that game. So they've actually been playing it for a long time. But places like, China and the Middle East, certainly in Dubai and in Transylvania. I also played in Ireland, but I didn't get a chance to write about being a member of the Dublin Flyers for an afternoon. But it was I just wanted to discover sort of the true spirit of the game. And we made a documentary based on that book called The Hockey Nomad. And you can watch that on YouTube or Vimeo. And the follow-up to that was actually The Hockey Nomad Goes to Russia. And we did 3,000 kilometers across Russia during the lockout year. And wow. And so kind of just like, traveling and sort of, in Canada, we tend to think that in a lot of cases, hockey is one story of, a player on the frozen pond, the Gordie Howe archetype. But really the game exists with its own set of characteristics and its own kind of players and its own kind of quirks in hundreds of places around the world. And those were the stories that I wanted to tell.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. Obviously we've all got our different stories. It's funny talking to people in Toronto and even more north than that. And in Canada, it's always the pond, right? But for me in St. Louis, it was, yes, we have cold winters, but we don't get the frozen over ponds all the time. So for me, my pond was street hockey. I played a ton of street hockey growing up, with a ball and the little tinier nets and and so it's funny when I see like, oh, hockey going back to his heritage on the pond. I'm like, well, that's your heritage. That's not everybody's heritage.
Well, and the truth is too, with climate change and global warming and all that, there are a lot fewer ponds than there were, although we did have a cold winter last year. But yeah, for sure, Austin Matthews, skated in a mall for the first time, right? There's a lot of, it's really depends geographically, climate-wise, where you are. But it shows you that, that's also a bit of a cliche that the player that skated outdoors is the one that kind of has the true, character of the game. But that's bullshit, right? Like character can be found in a lot of places. And frankly, I think as Canadians, we have to look at the way others see our interpretation of hockey, the way we see how people interpret basketball players from Canada. I mean, there are people in the States that can't possibly imagine, the league MVP having come from an industrial city, right, in Ontario. SGH from Shy Gilgeous-Alexander from Hamilton. So we profile and we classify the prototypical hockey player at our own peril because they can come from a lot of different places.
Well, I think this is a perfect tie-in to talking about what we wanted to talk about today. Your documentary that released a couple years ago, the Summit 72 series. And I'll first share that finding this was dumb luck. I literally just typed in because I love just learning more about the game. Kind of going back to your book of Tropic of Hockey is I'm always like, tell me something about the game that I don't already know. And so I saw this and I thought, I need to watch this. And I watched it. And again, like Canadians, they're probably not as shocked by some of the stuff that I saw and heard. But for me as an American, yes, we all know what the Summit Series was in 1972. It was, the Team Canada, the NHL team of all-stars against the Soviet Union. And for those younger fans are probably thinking like, that's crazy. We see that every 4 years. Back in the day, this was not the case. NHL players did not face European clubs or clubs from overseas. So this was for Canada, it was we need to beat them in this 8-game series and prove that we're the best. And for Russia, kind of the underdog in this story because they typically play against amateurs. They were like, we're going to prove we can beat the NHLers. So for me, it was really interesting, especially in that first episode. It's a 4-episode series. First episode, hearing about and you actually got like footage that happened back in the day of Team Canada is going to sweep them. This is going to be an 8-game series. Russia might score 1 or 2 goals. Like this is going to be just a pony show. And out of nowhere, Russia even takes game 1 and proves, hey, we can hang with these guys. So for me, like just hearing that part of the story that I had never heard before, that Canada was kind of like, Russia doesn't stand a chance. Nowadays, we would laugh at that. But yeah, it's just that so finding that voice, finding that narrative, was that something that kind of came naturally to you, or did you kind of have to do a lot of research to discover that?
I wrote a book about the 72 series called This is Game 8. Sorry, no, it was called A Wild Stab for It, based around the final game of that series. So I was fairly intimate with the narrative, and I certainly remember watching it when I was a kid. And I've written a little bit in Tropic of Hockey. I write a little bit about Esposito and his performance over that 8-game series. But so the narrative of the game was really familiar to me, and any Canadian who watched it live will never forget it for the reasons that you presented. I mean, when we first saw the Russians, they had flower pot helmets and they had crappy skates. And they didn't look the way that we expected a hockey player to look, and they played a really bewildering system that wasn't really focused on attacking. Honestly, hockey at the time was really north-south, right? Yep. All the way, and there was no kind of circular. There's nothing circular about skating patterns, and that was what the Russians really. Their play was a lot more similar to soccer, for instance, and certainly back in 1972, we didn't know anything about soccer, especially if you were an Anglo-Canadian. Their techniques of training seemed really, from like the 1950s. It was really kind of more fitness based. They seemed to lack character, and so when they came into the Montreal Forum for that first game. We also assumed, they were used to playing on international ice, and this was an NHL-sized rink. Little did we know that they actually built a replica-sized rink of the Montreal Forum on their training base in Moscow to get themselves ready. I mean, this team, this set of athletes, 22 skaters. They were together for 8 months preparing for this single series. The Canadians had never. They were all, in fact, a lot of cases with the Canadians, they were enemies. I mean, they fought each other, through the course of the NHL season. So for them to be unified in any ways was preposterous coming, through the beginning. But we just thought they just dropped the puck and the Canadian skill would take over and that would be it. And they do go out to a 2-1 lead. And then after a while, you just see how totally out of shape the Canadian. I mean, they weren't used to playing in September, anyways, right?
Right.
In fact, a lot of the players, when they were invited to the team, and told that they had to start camp in August were like, I don't want to give up my summer for this. So a lot of them were really reluctant the first time, and the Russians beat them 7-3. In that first game, and really Russia was clearly the better team. Over the course of those first 4 games in Canada, when the Canadians got on the plane and headed behind the Iron Curtain, I mean, that's another exceptional thing about this series. Like back in 1972, no North American athletes went to Russia. It just wasn't a thing. I mean, no people went to Russia.
Right.
So it was exceptional, right, that they went there and did that. But they left with the tail between their legs. And I remember, friends of my parents saying, I'm not even going to watch the series in Russia because, they're an embarrassment to the nation. They were also embarrassed Canada partly because of the way they responded to the Russian skill, right? They tried to hack at them. They tried to goon them. They tried to goad them into fights. That didn't work either because the Russians were so disciplined. But when they went over there, things looked dire for Team Canada.
Yeah, and I'll say, for those that may not know, it was kind of a tour of Canada for those 4 games.
Right.
Started at the Forum, then you went to Toronto, then you went to Winnipeg, and then ended in Vancouver. Then the 4 games in Russia were all in Moscow. But the thing that I kind of laughed about, I think it might have been Esposito as you interviewed him, now, was basically like, back in those days, NHL players, their season ended and they would just go sit on the couch and basically eat potato chips. They didn't train like how they do now. And so, for them, it's like you said, the Russians are preparing for this game. They've built a rink to match the Forum. They've got, they're doing their normal workouts all summer long, while NHL players are just like, we got the skill. We'll show up in September and beat their asses. And clearly that's not what happened.
Yep. There used to be a bar here. It's still here, but it's not owned by the same person. But there was a bar called Shakey's that was owned by the former NHLer Mike Walton. He played in the WHA as well. But me and my friends used to go there because he had these kind of like photo album shots that he'd framed and he'd put them up on the wall. There's one great photo of him actually fighting Gordie Howe in an All-Star game, which was wow. Incredible that even happened. But there was a photo that I remember, and it's Esposito and a couple of other Bruins at Bill Waters' cottage, and Bill was their agent. And this is clearly the summertime. It's the off season. Wayne Cashman is standing on the wet bar. He's got plaid slacks, and I think he's got like a 26er of, Crown Royal Canadian Club. He's drinking it. Espo is like fat. He's a fat guy. He's like on the wet bar and he's looking up at Cash and he's cheering him on. And yeah, you're right. That's how those guys trained in the off season. Like they just sat in a Muskoka chair and pounded the beers and looked out at the water. And yeah, and the Russians, of course, like they were, and some of the footage we have in the piece too shows them carrying each other on their shoulders as they're running up a trail in, rural Russia. Like they committed and they studied, film. They requested film and they got it sent to them from the Hall of Fame and they studied it and they pored over it. But, the Russian players will also tell you, when they going into that first game, they were terrified. They were terrified because if they embarrassed Soviet Union, if they embarrassed, Brezhnev, situation could be frankly like dire for them, right? If Russian players had it pretty good. If you were a national team player, you got a nice apartment, you got a nice car, all of that kind of stuff. But if you were if you're kicked off the national team, it was a pretty significant drop to the next level, and you lost a lot of those privileges. So a lot was on the way more. Listen, and the NHL guys, sure, it was embarrassing to them, and sure they stood the chance of being humiliated by this opponent. But they were also going back to their NHL teams, and they were still going to be stars in their hometown, especially the American players that play, or the players that play for American teams. Half of that fan base, probably wouldn't have watched the games anyways. So yeah, with the Russians, it was a matter of life and death in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, and so you mentioned, the humiliation aspect of it. So after Game 4, and I don't want to, obviously people know the story behind the 8-game series, but to get a little bit more in depth, Game 4, they lose that one in Vancouver, and the series at that point, there was a tie in there, no overtimes in the series, by the way. There was a tie in there, so the Soviets were actually up 2-1 as they left Canada, heading to the USSR. And there's a very famous moment, and I did know about this one, where Vancouver is booing Team Canada and they booed them throughout the game. They booed them as they were leaving the ice. And then there is a speech from Phil Esposito that is just, I mean, iconic, a very iconic moment. So for you, again, you had Phil on, like you actually got to interview Phil when he was remembering his speech and kind of speaking about what was transpiring in his head as he was saying these words to the Canadian people. I mean, what was his temperament like?
Yeah, he's on the ice, and he's just, sweat is just pouring off this poor guy, like onto the microphone, and people are booing him from the stands, and like you said, they booed the team the whole game. And Espo is just a classic heart on his sleeve moment when he talks about sacrificing themselves for the love of Canada, right, and being there because they love their country, and telling actually in a weird way, it's a bit of a fuck you to everybody who is not going to stand behind us. And I write about this in Tropic of Hockey about personally, the CBC and CTV, all the national broadcasters in the 70s were super white. Like everybody on the news, all the entertainers were all, really Anglo. And I was a young Italian Canadian kid. And to see this Italian Canadian hockey player get all of that camera time was not insignificant to me on a purely cultural level. But it was one of the great leadership speeches of all time. It's like, you're either going to stick with us or you can fuck right off. And at the same time, he's also, because he's Espo, he's really sympathetic too. So you really feel for this guy. But that's how they left. And he also tells the story. I guess they played 2 games in Sweden before they went to Russia. And we have footage of the game. But the games in Sweden were vicious, really dirty, both teams. But Espo tells a story about how they were staying at the Grand Hotel in Stockholm, and they were days before heading off to Russia behind the Iron Curtain. And they grabbed a case of beer and they dragged it to the park, and a bunch of them sat in the park, and they just talked about what they had to do to kind of come together. He said that's when they kind of really came together as a team. So again, the kind of the narrative twists and turns, because now you have Canada going into Luzhniki Sports Palace in Moscow, and it's the Russians who are overconfident, and it's the Canadians who are playing, because their reputation is at stake here. So it's amazing. The series is amazing in the sense of, just how many kind of twists and turns it takes over the course of those 8 games. And that was one of them.
Well, you mentioned twists and turns. I mean, how many lead changes were there in this series? I mean, it was every game. It seemed like there was at least one major lead change. I mean, there was 3-1 leads, 4-1 leads evaporated by the other team. So, and you mentioned it's just even in just, because you're not showing full games in this documentary, you're showing clips. You can see the dichotomy between the play styles and how after a while Canada is just worn down in these first 4 or 5 games. And then it's finally kind of like a gut check, like, okay, guys, we've played a bunch of games now. We're getting back into our NHL shape. Let's start taking it to them. And then they come in the last 3 games, win the series, which was incredible. We'll talk about game 8 especially, but to be able to come back and have the internal testitude to come through and win these games in Russia. I mean, that's a huge
Well,
driving force for these players.
Yeah, we can bring it actually back to St. Louis here a little bit as well, because I think after Game 5, again, that you like you mentioned, they have the lead. The Russians score 3 goals out of nowhere. They beat Tony Esposito to win Game 5, and Canada, as a result, Canada has to win the last 3 games to win the series. But it's Red Berenson, actually, the former Blue, who comes into the dressing room. I think Brad Park talks about this and says that Red said, "We're not going to lose another game, guys. We're not. We got these guys right where we want them." And he could sort of see. I mean, it's been proven over the course of his life what a brilliant hockey mind he is. He's such an incredible storied coach, college coach, but he could see that a few of the things that they tried to do they didn't result in the win in Game 5, but they were effective. And one of those things was, and this is kind of the genius of Harry Sin, the coach, as well. He decided to bring his wingers back a little bit, so not have them too deep into the corner. And he decided to activate his defense. And players like Serge Savard and Brad Park played a lot better that series because of it. So there was pressure from the back end. And traditionally with hockey, outside of maybe Bobby Orr and a couple of others, NHL defensemen in the 70s, they played back, right? They didn't rush the puck. And so he stole an idea from the Russians. They were always activating their D. So he had the D activated. So I think it was sort of the levers were moved in a way that altered the Canadian game just so, and they were able to come back. But, one of the things that one of the large narratives of them being in Russia was just the nefarious means by which the KGB and the Russian team manipulated the players. Like there would be phone calls in the middle of the night. Somebody talks, I think one of the fans talks about all of a sudden the national anthem would start playing on a speaker in the room in the middle of the night. This story is apocryphal, but I think it still depicts what the situation was like. But the legend was that Frank Mahovlich pulled up some carpet and found what he thought was a listening device, like a domed listening device on the floor, and he unscrewed it to find the listening device, to tear it up. And when he did, he heard a crash below him. It was actually it was holding the chandelier in place in the ballroom below the apartment. But Espo said, like their stakes would go missing. Dryden tells a story about how they found out that finally they were going to get a skid of Coca-Cola for them, the familiar taste of home. And he said when the skid rolled into the dressing room, it was 48 cans of Jolly Cola from Denmark. It wasn't even Coke. But all of these circumstances, again, like it united them because they were all, facing this together, all of this kind of hardship. Their backs were against the wall. And I also think it's important to remember, and certainly Americans will remember this as Canadians will, but it was the Cold War, right? And the Russians were, like a nuclear armed up superpower on the world stage. And as a kid who didn't really understand geopolitics, myself and my friends literally thought that if the Russians won this series, we were going to become a communist nation, because that was going to be the first step in them overtaking North America, certainly Canada. So all of that was, all of those stakes were real. They were real to the people that were watching the tournament, and they were certainly real to the players who were playing it.
Yeah, no, and so one of my favorite parts that's mentioned in I believe it was Game 8, the referee change. There was supposed to be, what was it? It was, you remember better than me, but the hey, this is not the ref that we're supposed to be using in this game. And all of a sudden, Canada gets 4 penalties in the first 8 minutes of the game.
Well, yeah, I probably, and listen, truth be told, probably a few of those were pretty well deserved because the Canadians were choir boys. But the Russians would switch out referees. The Swedish referee would suddenly come down with an illness, and they would have to use the East German referee, right? So all of those things, like the Canadians would show up for practice at their their defined time, and there would be a figure skating class on the ice, and then they would have to negotiate. So a lot of those it was hard enough to beat this this legendary team, let alone have to face down all of these other circumstances by which the Russians tried to rig it so that it would make it easier for them to win.
So I mean, we got to talk about Game 8, the goal that a lot of Canadians call it, the goal. 34 seconds left in play, and I mean, obviously the Russians just thinking we're going to walk out of this with a tie. At least this is not going to be a win for Canada. Paul Henderson, and again, just a spark of genius from him. Really, he calls off Pete Mahovlich, one of the greatest players to ever play the game, calls him off the ice just because he says he had a strange feeling that he was going to score to break the 5-5 tie.
Yeah.
He gets the rebound off an Esposito shot, puts it on. Tretiak makes the save, gets his own rebound, scores. 34 seconds left. Canada goes on to win the 8-game series, all because of a strange feeling that Henderson had. I mean, what an incredible moment, incredible story.
Well, and another thing about Henderson is he scored 3 straight game-winning goals in the 3 games that Canada had to win in order to win the series. Like, guy probably had the best week ever of any hockey player short of Wayne Gretzky. Like he something, and Henderson as well was, I don't want to call him a marginal player, but him and Ron Ellis. I mean, Ron Ellis was a hardworking winger who was really effective against the Russians as well. But they were also, named to this team partly as a sop to, the Toronto fan base, right? The Leafs didn't have they had a pretty good team in '72, but it wasn't heavy with stars. And so they were almost named to the team as an afterthought. But Henderson, he's never played hockey as well as he did, as dominantly as he did that week in Russia. But I also think the big ice was favorable to a player like him. One thing he did always have was speed. He was a really quick player. But the goal he scored in Game 7, he dekes through 4 guys, and as he's falling, he chips it over Tretiak's shoulder. And he says, I think in the series, he says, that was the greatest goal I ever scored, but the only one that people remember is that garbage goal to win the series in Game 8. We should also, we probably should talk about Bobby Clarke a little bit too. I mean, he 2-hands Valery Harlamov on the ankle. Valery Harlamov was easily the Russians' best player. He was killing the Canadians. We'd never really seen a player like him, half Spanish, half Russian. He skated beautifully. He had speed. He had a beautiful shot. And Bobby Clarke took him out of the series. People have asked me about sort of my personal opinion about that, because it's really one of the most violent things anyone has ever seen in the game, as critical as that. And it's hard to give, obviously, anybody a pass who does that kind of damage, but the stakes were so high. And I often think that if I was in that position, I could see the temptation of wanting to do that, of having to take a star player out in order to win, because it was just such a huge thing, nationally, culturally, in a sporting sense, a geopolitical sense, and especially for Canadians, Jeff. Like, we didn't have a lot of writ large, sporting moments. We'd never had success at the Olympics until really the 90s. We didn't farm out a lot of, great international athletes. So for us to have that kind of victory, on an international stage was significant for that reason, for sure.
Yeah, and so one of the things that stood out to me as someone who has watched and loved the 1980 U.S. win over Russia, which is one of probably the greatest sports moment in U.S. history. To win that game, again, Cold War, same circumstances, but in the Olympics, you saw a young Vladislav Tretiak.
Mhm.
By the time the U.S. came around in 1980, he was well established. But you got a young Tretiak who stepped in, played in all 8 games, which the Canadians split the time between Dryden and Esposito in goal. Tretiak, you're thinking this is a young kid. And I remember even hearing in the documentary somebody say that they thought that was going to be the weak point for Russia. Like, oh, we got this kid in net. We're just going to light him up. Well, then Tretiak comes out and does Tretiak things. I mean, I'm sure for the U.S. or for the Canadians, that was probably one of the breaking moments early in the series to be like, wait a minute, this kid's a strength for the Russians.
Well, another kind of brilliantly devious thing that the Russians did was the Canadians wanted to come over and do some intel, scout the teams, and they said fine. And they said, show up on this day. The Red Army will be playing this team, and a lot of the players on that national team were Red Army players. So 2 Toronto Maple Leaf scouts went over there and came back and reported on the team and said, listen, their goaltender's terrible. Like, this guy cannot stop a beach ball. Well, it turned out that game was the night after Tretiak's stag. So the Russians were like, yeah, you want to come and see our goalie? You want us to come and see our team play? You should come to this game. And it was the game after the night that he'd been out to like 6 a.m. So he did give up like 11 goals, but it was the Canadians were hoodwinked. So when they went back and reported back to the team, they were like, you're going to have no problem scoring goals. This guy's a sieve. And he was also, even put that aside, he was also 21, right? So you have a kid, playing in the biggest hockey series in his nation's history. It was a lot. It was a lot to put on his shoulders. And I will say, yes, Tretiak was brilliant and had a brilliant career and is fully deserving of his induction to the Hockey Hall of Fame. However, when you do see the Canadians getting a bit of a leg up in Russia, it was a lot to ask of him to be a wall, over the course of 8 games. And, Esposito and Dryden, they alternated, right? Two goalies carried the load, and there was no Russian backup goalie, really. I mean, he was just ornamental. Tretiak. So 21, and listen, and in spite of the fact that those circumstances were so tough, he still, was among the 3 best players for the Russians for sure.
Yep. So I have to ask you, because for me, like I said, there was a lot of learning culturally with this series that I did not know. I did not realize at the time, and probably sounds dumb to a Canadian, that, Canada was like, we're going to kill Russia, because, hearing the things about the 1980 team, it was the exact opposite. It was Team USA is going to get stomped by Russia. So, for me, that was my learning moment about this series. You, who lived this series, witnessed this series, wrote a book about it already, but interviewing the players, watching the old footage, I want to know, what did you learn about this series?
Yeah, I learned a lot from Brad Park in particular. And I don't know if you've had Brad on the show, but he's just that's a 10 out of 10 guy, and most of them are, I must say. And everybody we interviewed was fabulous. Pete Mahovlich breaking down in tears when he talks about the Canadians who were in the stands. That was a fun part of the series too, Jeff. Going back and talking to the 3,000 Canadians, a handful of them who actually went over to Russia to cheer on Team Canada, and their experiences there. And as we were making the film, we wondered whether there was any home movies that people had made, Super 8 movies about their trip to Russia, and we got, we put that call out, and we had a lot of people responding, and people sent us their films of their time in Russia, which we used quite a bit in the film, which was really great. But I learned a lot from Brad Park just in terms of strategy, and in terms of some of the things they did in order to kind of, again, because the Russian system, it's commonplace in the NHL now, a player taking the puck, reversing fields, right? Taking the puck back and circling along the blue line and all of this kind of circular motion. That was so foreign and so new and so unique to us that the fact that Harry Sinden and his staff too was able to kind of break it down and figure out a way to to blunt that with players who'd never played that kind of system before was revealing to me. Because I thought, and I think the narrative too is generally heart and soul. These guys, use their heart to overcome the adversity. Well, it also, like, good coaching helps too, right? And I will say as well, like, it was amazing too that Harry and John Ferguson were just able to hold it together. Those guys were losing their shit in those games, man. That was like, but they were able to just like kind of walk a very even path, which the great coaches, I think, generally do. And there were certainly two of them.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I'm not sure if you have this information, but clearly with this being a Canadian most documentary, how can people view this? And even for people in Canada, for me, I was able to find it on Amazon Prime. But is there any other ways? Yeah, like I said, we have listeners in Canada that people could be able to check out Summit 72.
Yeah, they can watch it on CBC Gem, which is the digital platform of the national broadcaster. It's all 4 episodes are up there, and like you said, in the States, Amazon Prime for sure. It's hockey season's coming up, kind of, right? So it's a good primer to get excited about what's to come, and it's great. There's always been such a strong local connection here, I think, with your team. I play in McCormick Arena, right in the city here, and that's where Jordan Cairo learned to skate and play his hockey. So I feel connected to the Blues for that reason. And also Doug Armstrong, I've had a chance to drink a bunch of beers with him, and he's a great dude too. So although we've got the Chief, so there's that, there's that.
That's what I always associate with Toronto. You guys, it's like, for me as like an anarchist, it's like, oh, I kind of like watching Toronto implode every year with the playoffs. But now I'm like, they got Chief. Like, I hope they win the Stanley Cup, because that guy deserves all the credit he gets. He's an excellent coach and obviously did a lot here in St. Louis. We always say he'll never have to buy a beer here in St. Louis.
For sure.
And I hope it's the same in Toronto, maybe coming up this season. We'll see.
From your mouth to God's ear, my friend.
Again, Dave, this has been awesome. I really appreciate this. I just wanted to ask you one last question. You have anything coming up for hockey fans that might be interested?
Hockey fans. Yeah, I'm working on a book, actually. I'm working on my next book is going to be a book about a goaltending. I started to play goal in my 50s. And it's going to be it's kind of almost turning into a bit of a self-help book, frankly, because I think goaltenders have to deal with 3 things inherent to their position: failure, pain, and loneliness. And it's sort of the lessons that I've learned by competing as a goaltender and applying them to life. So doing that now, writing that now.
I cannot believe you are starting goal at 50. No thanks. I will pass. I'm in my 40s and no thank you.
Right on. Well, it's listen, you're on the ice the whole game, so there's a bonus.
That's true. You want playing time, you'll get it as a goalie.
Well, if you had a look at some of the guys that are shooting on me, you probably it wouldn't be too hard to get around.
That's right. Well, this has been Dave Bidini, again, the publisher of West End Phoenix. And for those of you not in the Toronto area, westendphoenix.com, but also a print magazine in the Toronto area, and an author of many hockey books. Just look up Dave Bidini on Amazon, as I did. You will find a bunch of them. And of course, the most important thing for this discussion, Summit 72. Excellent series. As I told Dave off camera here, that this was probably my favorite hockey documentary. So much to learn, and just hearing the stories from these players was fantastic. So definitely check it out. Dave, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Jeff. Good luck this year.
Thank you. Well, thanks again to Dave for an incredible interview. And again, I can't say it enough. Summit 72 was a really cool documentary to check out if you have not seen it, or if you're looking for a new hockey documentary to watch. Always a great thing to watch over the summer to get you ready for the season coming up here. And we've got a couple weeks, guys. Couple weeks. We'll be talking about training camp and preseason. So we're getting there. It's definitely the dog days of summer, but we are getting there. Next week, we've got a couple different things that we're working on. We've got some friends of the show that we're working on possibly bringing in for like a roundtable discussion, people we've had on in the past. We've talked, Curt, Bill, and I, about doing a mystery hockey theater. So we will have something next week. We're just not sure exactly what it is yet, but stay tuned to us on social media, and we will let you know when that next episode airs. Support for Let's Go Blues Radio is brought to you in part by Mike Burgoyne from Real Brokerage Realty. Email him at mike@strikewithmike.com or visit strikewithmike.com today for all of your home buying and selling needs. That will do it for episode 42 of season 14 of the original St. Louis Blues hockey podcast, Let's Go Blues Radio. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great week, everyone. For Curt Price and Bill Day, as well as Dave Bidini, I'm Jeff Ponder, and I will talk with you next week. This was Let's Go Blues Radio. Until next time, everyone, let's go Blues.
A Mark Goodson television production.
Sit, Ubu, sit. Good dog.
One little, two little, three little engines. 4 little, 5 little, 6 little engines. Uh-oh, sorry, that one was a half-breed.
Mentos fresh and full of life. Nothing gets to you. Staying fresh, staying cool. With Mentos fresh and full of life. Fresh goes better. Mentos freshness. Fresh goes better with Mentos fresh and full of life.
Mentos, the fresh maker.